We begin our afternoon session now. If I could ask you please quickly to take your seats. You'll have an opportunity to chat during the reception afterwards. Let's make the most of our time together now. Our panel this afternoon will be dealing with national initiatives and plans to develop conflict-sensitive education policies and programs. And I'd like to call upon Khalil Mashi, Director of IIEP, to introduce and to moderate the panel. Thank you very much.
If I speak, yes, it's good. Somebody said if I speak from here, you wouldn't hear me. Is it loud enough? Good. This session is really important for a number of reasons. Because, first of all, we have ministers who are leading their education sectors and who have, as we say, burned their hands while doing the work. So this is an opportunity to learn firsthand, as we have heard in the previous session from the Honorable Minister of Uganda, pinpointing some of the issues that we have to address too. So this is the session where we hope that the ministers will share their experiences and will therefore lead the way forward, because we can learn from these experiences. The second reason is that this is the session when you, the participants, the audience, will have more time to ask questions and to participate. But please, let's make the comments, the questions, the contributions, the interventions very brief, to the point, not to exceed 3 minutes. And we have to be strict with ourselves, otherwise we will not be able to finish in time. I will also, Honourable Ministers, I will be very strict with you as well, if you allow me to. I have no personal reason why I should be stopping you, but it's the reasons that I have to conduct the business properly. I'm delighted today to welcome again, I have welcomed all of you, but I'm delighted to welcome again Mrs. Lamisa Alami, the Honorable Minister of Education from Palestine. I'm also very delighted to greet and welcome again the Honorable Minister of Education from Liberia, Mrs. Etmona Tarbet. Is this how we pronounce it? Thank you. And we had also the pleasure of talking to the Minister, the Honorable Minister of Education from Mali, His Excellency Bokar Musa Diarra. I will give each of you 10 minutes maximum. And what we would like to hear from you is your experiences in terms of making policies, designing plans and programs where you have incorporated and you have taken into consideration and mainstreamed, hopefully, crisis-sensitive planning, dealing with conflict, but more importantly, preventing conflict. What we would like from you is really, what do you recommend for us after, I hope everybody will endorse the guidelines? What do you recommend for us practically to do from your experiences? Now, I'm very delighted that on this session we have chosen 3 ministers, out of whom 2 are women. This gives me a real pleasure. And I'm very sorry to say that although I have mixed feelings about another firm leader, the Iron Lady, I'm very sorry to say that Mrs. Thatcher has passed away today. I think some of you know, but the news was broken when we were in this session. This is how I know, and it is a great loss to the international community. She was a leader in her own respect, and she was the only Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. So my condolences to the United Kingdom. I don't know if the ambassador is here, but it is a great loss. This is to say that we really have to perform to our best while we are still in this world, and therefore, ministers, without further delay, I would give you the floor. Maybe I should start with Mrs. Alami. You have 10 minutes, Mrs. Alami.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm thrilled to be here and address the audience as a fully fledged member of UNESCO and not plead for an audience the way I did at the ministerial meeting in 2007, where Palestine had an observer status then. Had it not been for the good offices of the Minister of Education of South Africa, I would not have had the opportunity to voice the case of countries in conflict and request that the slogan, "No country left behind," to be added to the slogan, "No child left behind." Probably the case of Palestine is unique. At a time it's suffering from the longest and only remaining occupation in modern times, it has managed to assert itself, educationally speaking, among countries in the region. And therefore, there are lessons to be learned despite the daunting experience. Soon after the 1948 war, and the realization that there was no quick solution to the Palestinian refugee problem, and that education cannot wait, educational needs, in addition to humanitarian needs, were given serious consideration by UNRWA and the host countries. The General Assembly resolution mandated UNRWA, wherever it functioned, to adopt the host country's curriculum. The West Bank continued to be annexed by Jordan, and the Gaza Strip was administered by Egypt until 1967, when both regions were occupied by Israel. In 1994, the Oslo Accords led to the establishment of the Palestinian Authority, by which it assumed only partial control of the territory. In the same year, the Ministry of Education was established. The Ministry of Education, like any other Ministry of Education, had to meet the challenge of providing for the right to quality and safe education for all, but under the most difficult circumstances. An extended conflict with no stability, security, or economic development, a donor-dependent country, no geographic continuity, not only between Gaza and the West Bank, but also within the West Bank itself, where it is partitioned into areas A, B, and C. Only areas A and B are under the alleged sovereignty of the Palestinian Authority. And Area C, which constitutes 60% of the West Bank land, is fully under the Israeli control, and where Israeli settlements are expanding at an extremely fast rate, and where schools, children, teachers are continuously exposed to all forms of life-threatening situations, imprisonment, and attacks, not only by soldiers, but also by extremist Israeli settlers. This situation is further augmented by the fact that East Jerusalem is alienated from the rest of the West Bank, and the famous apartheid wall has created partial or complete isolated villages. Of course, the Gaza Strip is a case of its own. The biggest challenge, therefore, to be met by the Ministry of Education is how to avail schools in order for children to have access to education. And here we are talking about 30% of the population in Palestine. This is where another lesson can be learned. Different policies and strategies have been adopted in different areas. The Ministry of Education resorts to double shifting, pressuring international bodies to secure rehabilitation or construction licenses from the Israelis for Area C, which until recently has been a mission impossible. providing caravans in remote areas, or lately providing transport for marginalized children under international control to protect children from settlers or soldiers' violence. In Jerusalem, where construction licenses are barred, ordinary houses are rented out, and definitely at a much higher cost for the Ministry of Education, having smaller classes and calling for a bigger number of teachers compared to regular schools. This policy and the great efforts invested behind it since 1994 led to big achievements. 92.6% of the children are enrolled at school. 78.8% of the children attend secondary education. Gender parity has been achieved. 93.5% of girls are enrolled at basic level and 81.1% at secondary level. Palestine prides itself on having the lowest percentage of illiteracy in the region, 5.6%. It goes without saying that all this would not have been achieved without the generous support the Ministry of Education has received from the international community. With this regard, the Ministry of Education has succeeded in establishing a joint financial arrangement among the donors where a basket fund is secured to match the requirements of the 5-year strategy plan that is owned by the Ministry of Education. The partnership at the international level has been paralleled at the national level. I think this is another lesson to be learned, the harmonization of funding by the different stakeholders in financing, training, and other activities. Another issue that I would like to take up in the implementation of the right to quality and safe education is that children's rights are indivisible. It's incumbent on the Ministry of Education or other responsible bodies to see that these rights are safeguarded. And here we're talking about the right to life in the first instance, protection rights from all forms of violence, the right to an identity as well as national rights, health rights, be they physical or psychosocial, particularly for traumatized children. The right of the children to participate in decision-making on issues of concern, and the right to play, among other rights. All these rights cannot be separated from the right to education. The Ministry's 5-year strategy plan and the emanating activity plans have adopted various modes of implementation to secure the right to quality education, be it through the curriculum or through co-curricular or extracurricular activities, and ensuring that the school environment is child-friendly and caters for the well-being of all individuals, and in particular, the disabled students, within the Ministry's policy of inclusiveness. Not only that, but the Ministry is also concerned that these varied activities should promote life skills, and in particular, the 21st century skills, create good citizens with positive values, and cater for a non-violent environment. To realize all these objectives, the Ministry is heavily investing in the professionalization of the teaching profession and the training of teachers in the various areas, the latest of which was conducted by INEE. The training extended by the Ministry also covers leadership skills at all levels of the spectrum. Equally well, the Ministry of Education has embarked on the development of its monitoring and evaluation system in order to measure how far it has traveled on the road to quality education. You can imagine how much can Palestine contribute to education granted complete statehood. As Lori mentioned this morning in her welcoming words, education creates resilience, and it is this reason in particular that helped the Palestinians to withstand the oppression of occupation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Alami, for the good lessons that you have shared with us, but also for keeping the time. I really appreciate Your Excellency. It's your turn now.
Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the distinguished organizer of this gathering. I'm delighted to be a part of this meeting and wish to thank UNESCO for the opportunity to discuss issues which focus on a major area of concern in respect of conflict sensitivity, as well as issues about fragile and conflict-affected areas. As we work together to drive a common framework which prioritizes conflict-sensitive education in crisis-affected countries, let us remain mindful that these conflicts certainly will negatively impact the learning process of the child. In the midst of conflict, there is absolutely no psychosocial balance in the teaching-learning process. The environment becomes unconducive. Some children are introduced to violence and antisocial practices, while some of them involuntarily assume tendencies of early adulthood. They acquire inappropriate values that impact their normal growth processes. Unavoidably, teachers and students become traumatized. Learning becomes highly challenging under these conditions. The statistics of more than 30 million children living in conflict-affected areas globally should be of major concern to us as educators and the entire world. It is even more disturbing to note that 30 million girls are out of school and 30% of them now live refugee lives. In view of the foregoing, the challenge before us is huge in respect of taking numerical actions to avoid conflict and any violent crisis by driving conflict-sensitive policies that will help improve the teaching learning environment and enhance learning. The need to pursue peace and state-building initiatives is paramount. I am pleased, however, that in the pursuit of instilling peace and restoring the value system of Liberia, the Ministry of Education, in collaboration with UNESCO, has trained presently 1,300 teachers in several schools in 3 rural counties for the teaching of peace, human rights, and citizenship education on a pilot basis in public schools. This project was funded by the Multi-Donor Trust Fund in 2009 to educate teachers and students to be conflict sensitive and learn to resolve their problems with a peaceful approach. Last year, the government of Liberia, in concert with UNESCO, developed a valued education curriculum under the Ivorian Refugee Protection with funding from the Japanese government. The manuals for the teaching of the subject for Ivorian refugee and host community schools are being developed and will be taught in the schools. The project, which targets 4,000 host community students and 3,000 refugee children, will restore lost values in children as a result of the conflict. Fellow educators and policymakers, the time is now for affirmative action with the accompanied needed mobilization of funds to restore dignity and sanity to the education sector for our future generations. Let us together encourage the involvement of all stakeholders in this venture, if all efforts must be exerted for the achievement of education for all, as well as the MDGs. In short, we need to take action now. Talking is talk. Action is what we need. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. You referred to the issue of the important role. I think the two ministers so far have pointed out rightly to the harmonization of the partners' action and the donor funding. And you have indicated how important it was to train 1,300 teachers on the education related to peace, how to teach peace. But you also called for action, immediate action by all of us. This is, I think, the main purpose of this session. How can we move into action and not only be talking about the need to have crisis-sensitive planning? Your Excellency, the Minister of Education, Mali, I am giving you the floor. We are all waiting to hear what you have to say, sir.
Merci beaucoup. Excellences, Mesdames, Messieurs, je remercie à mon tour l'UNESCO pour avoir pris l'initiative de convoquer ce symposium extrêmement pertinent et d'associer mon pays et lui permettre de livrer son expérience personnelle par rapport à la question posée. Comme les ministres qui m'ont précédé n'ont pas utilisé leurs 10 minutes, j'espère que M. Machi me permettra de livrer le contenu de mon propos. La situation politique au Mali a été généralement stable au cours de la dernière décennie. Le Mali était attelé à mettre en œuvre des réformes relatives à l'amélioration de la qualité et au renforcement de la gestion décentralisée de l'éducation de base. Le secteur de l'éducation a bénéficié de l'appui budgétaire au secteur ciblé depuis 2006, ainsi que de l'appui direct à travers des projets d'investissement. L'appui budgétaire des bailleurs de fonds représentait en moins 30% des recettes publiques locales en 2011. De l'analyse économique des années avant la crise, il ressort que le Mali a toujours accordé la priorité au secteur de l'éducation, dont les parts comparativement élevées restaient autour de 4,6% pour le PIB et 24% pour le budget national. L'évaluation sectorielle de 2008 a noté que malgré les progrès réalisés au cours des dernières années, le Mali a continué d'avoir les indicateurs d'éducation les plus faibles de la sous-région. Les principaux problèmes dans le secteur de l'éducation étaient l'accès insuffisant et inéquitable à l'éducation, en particulier pour les filles et les pauvres, la faible qualité de l'éducation telle que l'indiquent les résultats limités de l'apprentissage qui se traduisent par le faible temps de travail des élèves et des résultats insuffisants de l'apprentissage, l'affectation et l'utilisation peu judicieuse des ressources, la faible gestion du secteur, y compris la gestion des enseignants, la construction d'écoles. Le Mali était engagé à mettre en œuvre des réformes de politique éducative relatives à l'amélioration de la qualité et au renforcement de la gestion décentralisée de l'éducation de base, lorsque les groupes armés ont pris le contrôle de tout le nord désertique du pays et qu'un coup d'État militaire contre le président élu a arrêté le processus. Alors, comment les questions relatives au conflit de notre pays ont été abordées par le système éducatif? Le coup d'État militaire a été immédiatement suivi de la suspension de l'aide par les bailleurs de fonds traditionnels du Mali. La capacité du gouvernement à faire face aux besoins urgents des populations déplacées sur son budget s'est ainsi trouvée fortement affectée, même si les budgets d'État en 2012, budget rectifié, et 2013 ont été revus à la baisse. On protégeait les parts allouées aux secteurs sociaux. Les données récentes révisées de 2012 sur les dépenses et les données du budget initial 2013, du moins du point de vue de la part du budget total, montrent que l'éducation reste la priorité dans la crise actuelle, après près de 24% du budget total et 37% du budget total récurrent. Cette diminution du budget présente des risques certains. En effet, le niveau de recrutement d'enseignants nécessaire pour soutenir le système, le rythme et l'atteinte des objectifs du millénaire pour le développement ne sera plus possible, et le risque d'abandon de l'école par les groupes d'élèves d'âge scolaire en raison du manque de nourriture, de matériel scolaire ou de place, du fait que les écoles existantes dans les centres urbains où les flux de personnes déplacées est concentré et augmenté. Alors, la remontée des informations des partenaires du cluster Education en collaboration avec les services techniques du département a permis d'estimer qu'il y a environ 40 000 déplacés à l'intérieur du pays et 600 000 réfugiés dans les pays voisins, principalement au Burkina, en Mauritanie et au Niger. On estime à environ 120 000 le nombre d'élèves déplacés des premiers et seconds cycles de l'enseignement fondamental, dont près de 40 000 vers le sud, alors que le nombre des élèves dans les pays voisins ainsi que ceux qui sont restés au nord n'est pas connu avec un niveau de certitude raisonnable. À la fin du mois d'octobre 2012, les régions du Sud les plus affectées par le conflit avaient accueilli plus de 35 000 enfants d'âge scolaire pour l'enseignement fondamental, c'est-à-dire les 7-15 ans. Une analyse des données recueillies a permis d'établir que sur ces enfants, seulement 10 000, soit 38%, ont pu être inscrits dans une école. Pendant la période et encore maintenant, il n'existe pas de données fiables sur le Nord, mais l'occupation a créé certainement et a joué certainement sur la fréquentation scolaire, surtout pour les filles. Les occupants s'en sont pris particulièrement à l'école laïque et à l'école mixte, où filles et garçons se côtoyaient. Les locaux de l'administration scolaire et les écoles ont été saccagés et utilisés comme camps militaires ou résidences. Plusieurs écoles du fondamental, premier et deuxième cycle, les lycées, instituts de formation de maîtres, instituts de formation professionnelle ont été détruits au nord par des groupes armés et par des bombes